I stared at the message on my phone and read it again and again as if the words would change on their own. You are not coming with us to Europe. My wife prefers this vacation to be a family vacation only. My hands felt heavy, and something inside me cracked quietly. I had paid for their new house with everything I had, thinking it would make us closer. Instead, this was what I got. Family vacation. And somehow I wasn't family. I didn't scream, I didn't even cry. I just sat there, staring at that screen, feeling the kind of silence that fills a room and refuses to leave. In that moment, I knew everything had changed. Thank you so much for watching my story. It means more to me than I can say, and I would love to know where you're watching from. So go on and leave it in the comments below, because I always love reading them. My name is Ruth, and I live in Iowa, a quiet place where the days feel long, and the nights give you time to think. I've lived here for most of my life, worked hard, raised my son on my own, and poured everything I had into making sure he never lacked anything. I'm not a perfect woman, but I've always loved deeply, and sometimes that kind of love makes you give more than you should without ever expecting it to run out. I remember when I first started saving for him, long before he ever knew the meaning of responsibility. Every dollar I kept aside was a little piece of my heart, and over the years, it became my habit to make sacrifices quietly. I gave up small joys and simple dreams so he could build his own life without ever knowing how much it cost me. I never once thought he would grow up and make me feel like a stranger standing outside the door of the life I helped build for him. I believed that love was enough to hold a family together. I believed that loyalty meant something that didn't need to be spoken out loud. I believed that a mother's sacrifices were invisible but never forgotten. That belief made me blind to the small signs I should have paid attention to. I used to brush them aside, thinking, it's nothing, he's just busy, it's just stress, things will be fine. But deep down, a quiet ache had been growing for a while, one I chose to ignore, because it was easier to keep hoping than to face the truth that something had shifted between us. The house I helped pay for wasn't just a building to me, it was a promise. A place where we'd still come together no matter how old he got, no matter how far life carried us. I imagined holiday dinners, birthdays, laughter filling the rooms I had carefully planned. I imagined being welcomed, not pushed aside. So when I saw that message, it didn't just hurt because of the words, it hurt because it stripped away everything I believed we still were. It made me feel like my love had an expiration date. Sitting in that chair, holding that phone, I felt something heavy in my chest settle in a way it never had before. I wasn't just hurt. I was tired. Tired of always giving. Tired of hoping for warmth that wasn't returned. Tired of being seen as useful but never truly wanted. And that tiredness didn't make me weak. It made me still, quiet, and clear. It made me understand that sometimes the people you love the most will turn your kindness into something they feel entitled to. That night, I decided I would not beg for a place in a story I helped write. I spent so many years building my life around the idea that family stands together no matter what, that the love you give comes back to you when you need it most. That belief carried me through the hard winters here in Iowa, through long nights when I had to work extra hours just to keep a roof over our heads. I used to think every sacrifice I made would one day turn into warm hugs, shared meals, and moments where I'd feel seen and appreciated. But sitting in that quiet house after reading that message, I started to understand how wrong I had been. The memories came to me one after another, soft at first like whispers I had ignored. I remembered buying my first piece of furniture with money I didn't really have, telling myself it was for a better tomorrow. I remembered when I helped him with his first car, with his schooling, and later with the house he now calls his. Every step of the way, I believed I was doing something good, something a mother does without expecting anything in return. But the truth is, when someone starts to see your love as a duty, they stop cherishing it, and that's when it begins to break you slowly, without you even noticing. I had dreamed about traveling with them on that trip, not because I wanted anything special, but because it would have meant something to be included, to be part of their joy. I had imagined seeing new places, holding hands with my grandson, laughing at little things, and feeling like I still belonged. The idea of being left behind hadn't even crossed my mind. That message wasn't just words, it was a door quietly closing on me, and it was sent by the very person I had carried through every storm. I sat there for a long time, longer than I care to admit, with the kind of stillness that wraps around your chest and makes breathing feel heavy. But even in that quiet, something inside me was shifting. It wasn't rage, and it wasn't even sadness anymore. It was a clear understanding that I would not let this be the moment that broke me. I've spent a lifetime giving, but I've also spent a lifetime standing on my own 2 feet. And if they decided I wasn't part of their family, then I was going to remind myself just how much strength I still carried. I wiped my eyes slowly, not because I was weak, but because I was done letting their choices define my worth. I realized that love shouldn't make you invisible, it shouldn't make you an option, and it shouldn't silence you in the house you built with your own hands. That night, I didn't cry myself to sleep. I just lay there, letting the weight of years settle on my chest, and I decided something quietly. If they could make choices that erased me from their story, then I could make choices that reminded them exactly who I was. I remember lying in the dark that night with my hands folded over my chest, staring at the ceiling as the quiet of the room settled like a blanket over me. My mind was heavy, not with confusion anymore, but with clarity. It was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes after you've finally accepted that something you trusted has cracked in a way it can't be fixed. I thought about every moment I had poured my heart into their lives, every corner of the house I helped them build, every memory I thought would bind us together as a family. All of it suddenly felt like a story written on paper that someone else had torn without even thinking. I understood then that love without respect is just a quiet way to disappear, and I refused to let myself vanish in a life I helped create. I was done being the extra seat at their table, the afterthought to their plans, the name they only remembered when they needed something. I could almost hear my own heartbeat, slow and steady, and it felt like the sound of a woman who had reached her limit. That kind of silence isn't weak. It's the moment before a storm begins to move. I turned on the lamp beside my bed and reached for the folder I had kept tucked away in the bottom drawer for years. Inside were the papers that still had my name written on them, the proof that I was the one who made their comfort possible. I traced my fingers across the ink slowly, feeling the weight of what those papers meant. For so long I had treated them as protection for my family, something to hold them up when life got heavy. But now, those same papers were reminding me of something I had almost forgotten, that the foundation of that house was mine. My name, my work, my sacrifice. I whispered to myself, soft but steady, that if they could build a wall between us with their silence, then I could draw my own line with my strength. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't plan to beg for a place at a table where I was no longer welcome. I was going to make a choice, one that would echo louder than any words they sent through a message. That night, I decided to stop holding on to a love that no longer held me back. I decided to reclaim the life I had built with my own hands. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way that felt different. Not the kind of quiet that comes with sadness, but the kind that comes when your heart has made a decision. The sun was just beginning to rise, sliding through the kitchen window, and I sat at the table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the papers laid out in front of me. It was strange how something as simple as a signature could change the course of everything, how a single decision could turn pain into power. For years I had lived with the thought that my love for them was a gift that would keep us tied together. But that morning, I finally understood that love without boundaries only teaches people to forget your worth. I picked up the first document slowly, reading every line like I was tracing the path of my own life, and with every page, my heart grew calmer. I had signed those papers with hope back then, believing they would give him a foundation to build a future. But I was still the one holding the ground beneath it all. My name, my effort, my sacrifices all still lived in those lines. And in that quiet kitchen, it felt like the power I had given away was gently finding its way back to me. My hands didn't shake this time. My breath didn't catch in my throat. I felt steady, almost like the woman I used to be before I let other people decide where I belonged. I reached for the phone and made my first call, my voice steady, not warm, not cold, just sure. I explained to the man on the other end that I wanted to stop the mortgage processing immediately, and as he confirmed each step, something inside me lifted. I called the furniture store next, calmly arranging for the returns, then another call to the lawyer to reverse the deed. It wasn't anger driving me, it was a quiet kind of strength that grows from hurt that's no longer begging to be understood. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming what was hers. As the hours passed, the house felt lighter, like it was finally breathing with me instead of against me. The walls that had once echoed with the sound of my giving now held a silence that belonged to me alone. I wasn't thinking about revenge, and I wasn't trying to teach them a lesson. I was simply making it clear to myself that I mattered too. I had given enough of my heart, and now it was time to give something back to myself. I folded the last document neatly, placed it in the folder, and whispered to the empty room that I would never again let someone make me feel like a stranger in a life I built with my own hands. The moment everything was set in motion, I felt something inside me grow stronger, almost like a quiet flame that had been burning low for too long and finally found the air it needed. I spent the next few days moving through each step carefully, not rushing, not second-guessing myself, just letting my heart and my mind work together for once. For so many years, I had made choices based on love, but now, for the first time in a long while, I was making choices based on self-respect. It felt different. It felt steady. It felt like standing on my own 2 feet again. I walked through that house slowly, room by room, taking in everything I had poured into it. Not with bitterness, but with a kind of acceptance that hurt a little and freed me at the same time. Every wall, every piece of furniture, every corner carried a piece of my sacrifice. For years, I had treated those things like they belonged to all of us, like they were a shared part of a family story. But the truth was, they carried my name. I was the one who stayed up at night making sure everything held together. I was the one who built that safety net that allowed them to dream without worrying. They might have forgotten, but I had not. The furniture was picked up, the accounts reversed, and the papers finalized. One by one, the ties I had quietly wrapped around their comfort began to loosen. And with every string I untied, I felt my chest get a little lighter. I didn't need anyone to see what I was doing. I didn't need an apology or a thank you. What I needed was to take back the parts of me I had handed away too easily. It was never about punishing them. It was about reminding myself that I mattered too. Each evening, I would sit by the window with the last light of the day falling across the floor, and I would whisper to myself that I wasn't just someone they could erase with a message. I had given them years, but those years didn't take away my right to stand tall. I didn't shake, I didn't flinch, I didn't cry. I simply kept moving forward, one quiet decision at a time. And for the first time in a long time, the house no longer felt like a burden pressing down on my shoulders. It felt like something that belonged to me again. I knew they were out there, smiling for pictures, sipping drinks, living their vacation, completely unaware of the storm that would greet them when they returned. And I didn't feel guilty about it. Not even a little. Because the truth is, when someone decides to treat you like you don't belong, you don't owe them a single explanation for reclaiming what you built. I sat there in that quiet house, letting the calm settle into me like an old friend. And I told myself that when they walked through that door again, nothing would ever be the same. And for once, that thought didn't scare me. It set me free. The days passed slowly but with a kind of steady rhythm, each one carrying me further away from the woman who waited and closer to the woman who decided. I didn't rush through anything. I allowed myself to feel every quiet moment, to breathe through every choice I made. It was strange, how after years of being wrapped in the noise of other people's needs, silence could feel like strength. I realized I didn't need to explain myself or justify anything to anyone. What I was doing wasn't out of spite, it was out of self-respect that had been pushed down for far too long. I remember the morning I walked into that lawyer's office. The air was still, and the room smelled faintly of paper and ink. I held the folder against my chest, The same folder that once symbolized a gift of love, and now it carried my decision to take my power back. My steps were slow, not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel each one. Every step felt like closing a door that I should have closed the moment they stopped seeing me as family. I sat down, looked the man in the eye, and said in a voice that didn't tremble, that I was ready to reverse everything. He explained each step carefully, but I didn't need much explanation. My mind was clear. My hands rested calmly on the table as I signed my name where it needed to be signed. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and yet it felt louder than any argument I could have ever had with them. I wasn't yelling, I wasn't fighting. I was simply choosing me, something I hadn't done in a very long time. When the last signature was done, I exhaled in a way I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. On my way back home, the air felt different. It was cool against my face, and the wind brushed through the trees like it was reminding me I was still here, still strong, still capable. I didn't think about their reaction. I didn't imagine their faces. I only thought about how good it felt to take my life back without raising my voice or losing my grace. This wasn't about teaching them a lesson. It was about remembering who I was before I let their choices make me feel small. When I got home, I sat by the window again. This time, without the heaviness pressing down on my chest. The documents were no longer pieces of paper I feared losing. They were a shield, a reminder that I had never truly lost control. They had just made me forget. As the sun lowered and painted the room in a soft golden light, I closed my eyes and felt the quiet victory settle deep into my bones. They were out there in perfect vacation, unaware of the storm waiting at home, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I felt like the one who finally stood up. The day everything became final, the air around me felt different. Heavier, but clear. Like the weight wasn't on my shoulders anymore, but beneath my feet, holding me steady. I walked into that last meeting with the lawyer knowing I wasn't the same woman who first sat in that chair weeks before. I carried no doubts, no trembling hands, and no small voice trying to convince anyone of my worth. I sat there, calm and still, listening as the last set of documents was placed in front of me. The pen felt firm in my hand as I signed my name one final time, and with each stroke, the life I had once handed over piece by piece began returning to me in full. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, sharp, and final. When the lawyer looked up and said everything had been reversed, I nodded slowly. I didn't smile, and I didn't cry. I just felt a strange peace settle deep inside me, the kind that only comes after you've spent a long time losing yourself and finally find the courage to take everything back. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about drawing a line that should have been drawn a long time ago. For years, I had carried the weight of their comfort as if it was my duty. That day, I placed it down and walked away without regret. The drive back home was quiet. The road stretched ahead of me, lined with trees swaying gently in the wind. The world outside moved like it always had. But inside me, something had changed. I wasn't the woman waiting for an apology. I wasn't the woman holding on to a seat at a table where I was no longer welcome. I was the woman who remembered her own strength. I passed the streets I had walked for years, the familiar corners that once felt so heavy with memories, and for the first time, they didn't pull me down. They felt like mine again. When I opened the door to the house, the air inside didn't feel suffocated anymore. It was mine again, in a way it hadn't been for a very long time. The furniture was gone, the papers were signed, the accounts were clear, and what remained was something stronger than all of it. Me. I walked through those empty rooms, touching the walls like I was reclaiming every quiet piece of myself that had been left behind. I stood still in the middle of the living room, the same room where I had once imagined their laughter, and I whispered to myself that they had made their choice, and so had I. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. It was the moment when pain no longer controlled me, when giving no longer meant losing, when love stopped being one-sided. I didn't owe them a warning, a message, or an explanation. Just as they had made their decision with a few careless words, I made mine with steady hands and a silent heart. And that silence carried more weight than any argument could have. It was the sound of a woman no longer asking to be seen. It was the sound of someone who finally knew her own worth. When I woke up the next morning, the house felt still, almost like it was holding its breath with me. Everything had been done. Every call, every paper, every quiet decision was behind me now. And what remained was that steady silence that no longer felt heavy. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes when you finally take your hands off a weight you've been carrying alone for far too long. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee, not because I needed the warmth, but because it felt good to stand in my own space and know that I had taken control of my life again. The walls didn't echo with their voices anymore. The rooms no longer reminded me of what I had given. It was just me, and for once, that was enough. I stood by the window and watched the sun stretch across the yard, painting everything with a soft, golden light. The kind of light that makes you breathe a little slower and remember who you are. It wasn't an easy feeling. It was layered, quiet, and full of years I couldn't take back. But beneath all of it was something stronger than the pain. It was the understanding that I didn't need to be where I wasn't wanted. That my worth didn't disappear just because someone forgot to see it. I thought about them far away, smiling, posting pictures, wrapped in their own world, completely unaware of the storm waiting quietly at home. But instead of anger, all I felt was stillness. Not everything needs shouting to be heard. Some messages are written in silence, and this was one of them. The house they called theirs was already gone from their hands. The foundation they took for granted was already back where it began. They built their walls with distance, and I built mine with strength. As the clock ticked softly in the background, I felt no guilt, no shame, and no fear. I wasn't trying to hurt them. I was simply done letting their choices erase me. I thought of every year, every sacrifice, every moment when I put myself second, and I realized I wasn't second anymore. I had finally chosen myself. The house stood quiet, not empty, but full of the strength I had been too tired to claim before. And deep inside me, I knew that when they returned, nothing they said would be able to undo what had already been done. I sipped the last of my coffee slowly, letting the warmth linger, and I whispered to myself that the woman who once begged to belong was gone. What stood in her place was someone who remembered her own worth and didn't need permission to stand tall. They would learn that lesson soon, not through anger, but through the silence I left waiting for them. A silence that told the whole story without me having to say a single word. The day they returned was warm and bright, the kind of day that looks beautiful from the outside but carries a different kind of storm on the inside. I heard the car long before it stopped in front of the house. The tires rolled over the gravel with the same ease I once used to greet them at the door with open arms. But this time, I didn't move. I stayed seated at the table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had grown cold, the silence in the house standing taller than I ever could. They didn't know yet. They didn't know that the world they left behind was not the same one they would walk into. The key scratched at the lock, and I heard the confused clink of metal when it didn't turn. I could almost see the expression on their faces through the wall, the way a smile freezes when something doesn't fit anymore. It was the sound of entitlement meeting reality. They tried again, louder this time, then a knock, hesitant at first, then firmer, like they were trying to shake the walls into remembering who they were. But the house didn't answer. Only silence did, and it spoke louder than anything I could have said. I rose slowly, not with anger or nerves, but with a calm that had taken root deep inside me over those weeks. I walked through the hallway, feeling the weight of every quiet decision I had made, and opened the door just enough to look at them. Their faces still carried the shine of their trip, the glow of a vacation lived without a thought of me. But behind that glow was confusion creeping in fast. I didn't rush to speak. I let the quiet hold them. That kind of silence doesn't need explanation. It has a way of settling into the spaces between words and making people see the truth for themselves. He looked at me with the same face I had once trusted without question, but now there was something else in his eyes. I saw the first flicker of realization, the way the ground begins to shift when someone finally understands that their actions have consequences. I didn't explain. I didn't owe them that. Everything that needed to be said was already written in the choices I had made. The house wasn't theirs to walk back into. The locks no longer recognized their key. And I no longer belonged to the role they had forced me into. I opened the door fully and stood there, not as someone waiting to be let in, but as someone who already belonged exactly where she stood. The breeze swept past us, and for the first time they looked small against the house they once claimed as theirs. I didn't have to raise my voice or remind them of their words. I didn't have to ask how it felt to be on the other side of the door. They already knew, and that quiet understanding filled the air heavier than any argument ever could. I stepped aside slowly, not to invite them in, but to let the silence between us do what my voice didn't need to. The locks were changed, the papers were signed, and the woman they thought they could push aside was standing right there, steady, calm, and unshakable. It wasn't revenge, it was truth. The kind of truth that doesn't need to shout because it has already spoken. And in that moment, for the first time, they had to listen. I watched them standing at the door for a long moment, the same way I once used to wait for their car to pull in, filled with excitement and warmth. But this time, there was no joy in my chest, just a steady calm that had been built piece by piece over the quiet weeks they were away. Their smiles were gone now, replaced by confusion that slowly tightened into something else, something sharper. I didn't move closer, I didn't soften, I simply stood there, letting them face the reality they had built for themselves. For years I had carried the weight of their comfort, but now that weight rested in their hands, and they didn't know what to do with it. He called my name the way people do when they're trying to rewind time, like saying it differently will make everything go back to the way it was. But things had already changed long before they set foot on that driveway. I saw it in his eyes. The shock of finally realizing that the world he took for granted wasn't his to control. His wife clutched her bag tightly, her face pale beneath the sun, and for the first time, she didn't have that easy confidence she used to carry. I didn't have to speak a word for the truth to settle between us. It was right there in the locked door, in the changed locks, in the silence that had grown too big to ignore. He tried to explain, his words stumbling over themselves like stones rolling downhill. But I wasn't listening for excuses. I had spent years listening, believing, forgiving, without ever being asked to be forgiven in return. This moment wasn't about explanations anymore. It was about consequences. I held the envelope in my hand and extended it to him slowly, not with bitterness, but with the kind of finality that doesn't need to be dressed in loud words. Inside was every paper that told the story of what I had done. It was clear, it was legal, it was mine. His hands shook slightly when he took it, and I could see it hit him all at once. Every smile on their trip, every careless decision, every quiet way they made me feel like I didn't belong was written in the silence surrounding us now. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The message they had sent me before their trip had already said everything, and now, this was my answer. I was done being the woman they called only when they needed something. I took a slow step back, not out of fear, but to remind myself that I didn't owe them anything. The house behind me wasn't theirs anymore, and neither was the space in my heart that I had once kept open, no matter how cold they made me feel. I looked at them, steady and quiet, and whispered the only words they needed to hear. If I was not family enough to be part of their joy, then they were not entitled to the life I built with my hands. And I watched as the weight of that truth settled on their faces, like a storm they never saw coming. I could see the truth settling in their eyes, not like a sudden flash, but like a slow weight pressing down piece by piece, until the air around us felt thick. They had walked up to this door believing everything would still be waiting exactly the way they left it, that I would still be standing where they placed me, holding their world together without asking for anything in return. But they had returned to something entirely different, and the house they thought belonged to them now stood as a reminder of everything they had chosen to ignore. I didn't move to comfort them, and I didn't flinch at their shock. I simply stood my ground, letting the silence stretch long enough for the truth to sink deeper than any words could ever reach. He tried to speak again, his voice catching in that way it does when someone realizes too late what they've done. I watched him look around, his eyes moving from the closed door to the envelope in his hands, and I saw the shift. The moment when he understood this wasn't a warning. It was already done. His wife's hand slowly slipped from his arm, and the confidence she once wore so easily was nowhere to be found. They were standing on the outside now, not because I pushed them there, but because they had chosen to put me on the outside first. All I had done was let the door stay exactly where they left it. I felt no rush to explain myself. For years, I had given them every explanation, every excuse, every piece of me they asked for without hesitation. But this time, my silence was the answer. This was not anger. This was not revenge. This was me finally drawing a line after years of being treated like I didn't matter. This was my way of saying I deserved better without having to raise my voice. I could feel the strength in my chest, the kind of strength that grows slowly and quietly, the kind that doesn't leave when the noise fades. Their faces changed, not with fury, but with the ache of realizing they could not undo what was already done. The house no longer belonged to their plans, their future, or their comfort. It was mine again, as it had always been, only this time they understood it. I turned slightly, my hand resting on the doorframe, steady and firm. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I simply let them stand in their own silence, the same way they once left me standing in mine. For a long time no one said a word. The air felt heavy, but it wasn't my burden anymore. It was theirs to carry now. And as the last bit of sunlight touched their faces, I knew they would never forget this moment. I didn't need them to agree, and I didn't need them to understand everything. All I needed was this quiet, steady knowing in my chest that I had taken my place back in my own story. And as I slowly closed the door, I felt nothing but peace. As I closed the door and felt the latch settle, a quiet calm moved through me, like a slow, deep breath I hadn't taken in years. I knew this moment would stay with them, not because of anything I shouted, but because of everything I didn't have to say. For so long, I had let my love be taken for granted, let myself be pushed aside like a guest in a life I helped build. But not anymore. This was my line, and I had drawn it without apology. I walked back into the house, not with a heavy heart, but with a steady one. Every step I took reminded me that I had chosen myself after years of being treated like I didn't belong. I sat down at the same table where I had read their message, but this time it didn't sting the way it once did. That night I had felt small, but now I felt whole. The walls around me no longer carried their laughter, but they carried my strength. And that was enough. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was simply done carrying the weight of being unappreciated. They were the ones standing outside now, and I knew they would never forget how it felt to be locked out of something they once believed they owned. I whispered to myself that love should never make you feel invisible. And no one, no matter how close, has the right to treat your kindness as if it were endless. I had given so much, but I had not disappeared, and that was the lesson they would have to live with. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need their approval. I only needed to keep standing where I finally belonged, on my own 2 feet. And to you watching, thank you for staying with me until the end of my story. If it touched your heart, I want you to know that your worth doesn't depend on how others treat you. Remember your strength, even when they forget it. Don't let anyone make you feel like a stranger in your own life. If you've ever faced something like this, share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Your presence here means more to me than you know.